Welcome to Dark Loops Productions She-Hulking, a podcast we're discussing Disney's new series, She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University.
I am Dr. Shelly Clevenger. I am chair and professor at Victim Studies at Sam Houston State University.
Excellent. So today we gather to discuss episode 5, Mean, Green, and Straight Poured into These Jeans. We're delighted to have on the show with us today Dr. Kellie Wallace. Kellie, please tell us a little something about who you are and why you like this show.
Hey, y'all. I'm Dr. Kellie Wallace. I'm an assistant professor of criminal justice at LaSalle University in Newton, Massachusetts. I also have a postmaster's degree in mental health counseling and spent some time as a clinical therapist in the greater Boston area. And I have very much been enjoying She-Hulk. I'm not going to be honest, I wasn't really sure what to expect from it straight out the gate, but it has definitely exceeded expectations. And I really like the portrayals that we're seeing of women, and not just the stereotypical women, but the variety of women that exist, both sort of anticipated and unanticipated, and the juxtapositions that we're seeing. So I've been really enjoying She-Hulk all in all. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now we're thrilled to have you here. So Shelly, you're going to start us with a question.
I am. So this week, I loved this episode, but my favorite part that I want to talk about is we see Jennifer, aka She-Hulk, who is being represented by a woman at her firm. And after she has been represented and we're kind of at the end and she's saying about the guy, because there's that moment where he talks about how he didn't like her as Jennifer. And she says, you know, you can do better. You know, you don't need to put up with that. Like, you can do better. And then they go off and have drinks together. Now, I chose this because oftentimes women who work in male-dominated environments are sort of pitted against each other, where, you know, they have to compete or they see themselves as competitors because there's usually one woman who can be the successful woman in that environment. So I loved seeing, I'm going to use the word sisterhood between those two, because at the beginning, you kind of think maybe they are going to be adversaries, that they're not going to be friends. You're not going to see that. And then you see that moment where she says, you know, you can do better. And so my question for you all is, what did you think about that? Did you think it was going to go towards sisterhood? Did you think it was going to go adversarial? What were your thoughts?
Kellie, please go first.
Sure. I think that's a great moment to pick, and I really enjoy this relationship as well. You know, in the beginning of the series, when they set up these two women, we have She-Hulk, who in her Jennifer form, in her human form, is this dowdy, small, kind of mousy woman. You know, she's obviously very smart and accomplished and competent at her job, but she's more what you would think of as a professional woman in that field. She's, you know, her clothes don't fit. She's not really wearing a lot of makeup. Her hair is never put in place. She's there for the job. Whereas her colleague is the total opposite. She's put together. I mean, they even said in episode 5, her outfits are a dime every time, right? Like she
buys them somewhere that has valet parking.
Yeah, exactly. And she's sort of this idealistic representation of what we want a working professional woman to be, but she's also clearly competent and intelligent. And they do sort of have a rivalry at the beginning, because Jen makes a point to say that she's lost cases to her before, and they have sort of been at odds. And I was not expecting it to go to sisterhood, to answer your question, Shelly. I really thought that I didn't expect it to boil up to a rivalry, but I didn't expect Jennifer to be so, I'm so glad we're friends now, right? She was so excited that they had a drink together. And it was a really sweet and honest moment. I think all of us can relate to having that experience with someone who we sort of look up to or idolize, or just think is so out of our league, for lack of a better phrase. And then when they do engage with us and they do like us, we're surprised, like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad this is happening, you know, like meet your idols kind of thing. So, but just the physical juxtaposition between these two characters, right? These are two professional women having the same job, and they look nothing alike until Jen, you know, becomes She-Hulk. Then she's stylish, then she's put together, which is a separate conversation. But I did enjoy that moment between those two because it was a nice way to show that the diversity that we see on the outside has nothing really to do with who we are on the inside. And once they started talking, it was clear that they had more in common than they had that set them apart. So that was a great moment to pick, Shelly. Great question.
Yeah, her colleague's name is Amelia, and I found her portrayal fascinating because it provided such a contrast to Jennifer. And the thing about sisterhood is I loved at the end when Jennifer says, "Oh, I'm so glad we're friends now." And she kind of like, "Whoa, back up, sister." Right? We're not that sisterhood-ish yet. And what I liked about that is it didn't collapse into two mushy people. This woman still has boundaries. And yeah, I said you can find someone better because I'm trying to help you out. And I do feel she sort of judges Jennifer as not being as good as her in the job. And she feels like there are things that she can teach her. And nonetheless, she has this wonderful moment, you can do better. And I just appreciated at the end that the writer still kept that bit of a boundary, so that what that actually does is it doesn't make Amelia look mean. It makes her look like an individual. Right. And that's the thing, is just when you're an individual, doesn't mean you're happy or sad or nice or good. It just means you have your boundaries, and the emotions come with those boundaries instead of, we all love each other. Because she's still going to be the number one person at that firm. She's going to take on anybody she has to be the number one lawyer in that firm. So I very much appreciated that final bit.
And they sort of physically represent the internal path of each character, right? So Amelia knows who she is. She has conviction. She knows what she wants. She knows what her strengths are. She knows how to win cases. She's on that path. Whereas Jennifer, especially, I mean, I would argue even before she became a Hulk, but even now that she is a Hulk, is really struggling with who she is. And is there a boundary between Jennifer and She-Hulk, or are they in fact the same identity? And how does she rectify this? And what does this mean for her now going forward? Instead of being just Jennifer the lawyer, now she's Jennifer and She-Hulk. And so physically, I think they represent that internal journey, but I think in their interactions with each other as well, we sort of see that. And maybe Amelia is a hashtag life goal for Jen. Like, this is someone that I can aspire to.
Hashtag life goals. Yeah. I actually love that. And I'm just going to sneak into my question comment because it just fits right there. As I hear you talking about the juxtaposition of these female characters, I'm thinking, is Jennifer like an every woman? In other words, you got Tom Hanks who's always playing the everyman, and that's a common phrase. And are we being presented with this character who's sort of like the every woman? And then she runs into all these different characters that allows the writers to express an every woman's hopes, dreams, fears, anxieties. What do you guys think? And please feel free to disagree.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I never really thought about her as being the every woman. For me, and I'm only speaking about me. I'm not going to put this out to the larger. For me, I see her as me. Like, I'm Jennifer, or I'm like me. And then when I go to work, I don't turn into She-Hulk, but I have like a face that I wear to work.
Yes.
And so I think like it can get at the duality of who you have to be in the world versus who you are at home. So, I mean, I connect with it that way. And maybe people would see me, some people, right, as like She-Hulk or like tough. I'm not even that tough, but like, that's my professional, but that's not who I am kind of on the inside.
Right.
That's how I see it. But it could be that every woman kind of scenario.
That really,
go ahead, please.
That really echo something I was talking about in one of my classes today with my students. I'm teaching a class called Beyond the Binary, which is basically LGBT 101. And we were talking about all the ways that what does gender determine in our society, and all the things, not sex, gender, and all the things that we don't realize are dictated by that, and how you're perceived professionally, and what that, like the gender roles for women outside of work flood into work. And so we still expect women to act like women in their professional roles, even when those are maybe more masculine jobs, like being a lawyer, right? You're arguing, right? That's the basis of the job, which is more of a masculine sort of trait. And so I think that's a really valid point that you raised, Shelly, that I am right there with you, that the way I present at work isn't necessarily who I am outside of work, because the objective is different, right? And being perceived as and taken seriously in a professional realm is a little more difficult when you're a woman sometimes. But back to your question, Scott, one of the moments that resonated with me in this episode actually relates exactly to that. And so when Jennifer is parading her, I don't know what the app was, but her Tinder dates, for lack of a better, on the stand, right, as her defense, and she's being absolutely mortified as this is going on. You know, the last guy, the one that she was interested in, who didn't want anything to do with her as Jennifer, but was only interested in the She-Hulk, he said very candidly, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm not at all interested in you as Jennifer, only as She-Hulk. And we sort of see her deflate. And as someone who had an awkward adolescent period and really struggled with figuring out sort of where my place was and who I was, I really related to that, because this was someone that she thought had a genuine connection with, that she really wanted to spend time with and get to know, and that person didn't reciprocate. And that's really deflating for us, especially if we think we have that connection. But I think everybody, regardless of gender, sex, status, whatever, has had that moment where they've thought something to be true about themselves, or another person had a perception of them that wasn't in fact accurate. And we've all deflated a little bit and felt that sort of insecurity or disappointment. And I think that is going to come back, and we're going to see that theme more in the show with her, because it is about finding out who she is. But I think that was a setback for her that every one of us has experienced in some way, shape, or form in our life. So I do think in some ways she is in every person, not just in every woman.
Yeah, as you were talking, I'm thinking of shows like Mary Tyler Moore, where you had a woman who was out in the professional world, yet at the same time, we had access to her vulnerabilities. And that's why she was the main character. And I'm just wondering, do you think they haven't really delved into anyone else's vulnerabilities in the show? And I'm wondering if do you think that that's sort of the way they're going to continue the show? And I guess that's what motivated me to talk about On Every Woman, right? Because there are feminist points being made by describing and revealing this particular character's vulnerabilities and strengths. So are we going to get a Titania backstory, in episode 8,
Yeah, I hope they keep it as her. I also, and I guess maybe this is not being very feminist, but I don't really want to hear about the male characters. Like, I want to hear about her. And it's her kind of show.
It's her story.
Right, yeah.
So I mean, I like whenever she stops and looks at the camera. I mean, I like it. And so I like hearing her vulnerability. And I always wish in my life I could stop and look at the camera
and say,
and
what the hell was that? Exactly.
I appreciate. There've been a couple moments where, when Bruce was on and when Wong first showed up, that she stopped and looked, and she's like, "Don't forget whose show this is, right? This isn't about them; it's about me." Would I love a Madison Wongers spinoff? Absolutely, but I'm inclined to agree with Shelly. I do hope that they keep it focused on her, or even the other. I'd love to get a little bit more about Amelia's backstory and why she who knows? Maybe she's driven to this point. Also, her best friend, in a very aside comment when they were setting up her dating profile, made a point to say hetero dating life is really grim, which makes me assume that she does not identify as hetero. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about her story as well, and maybe how they became friends in that situation too. But yeah, I'm on board with Shelly here. I liked it to be mostly about Jen.
Yeah, no, I get it. I gotta say, I absolutely love the scene when she said, "Oh, I got to go pick up my clothes," and then she goes to get her clothes, and he pulls this whole rack out, and she just goes, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, ooh." And I'm going to tell you what, that is not a gender specific response, because when I go to the right store and I see the right clothes in the rack, I'm like, "Ooh, ooh, 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 ooh." So I just love the way they write her having those little special moments of humanness. So Kelly, what do you want to talk about?
I mean, this is such a dynamic show. And again, I wasn't really expecting it to be so relatable, I guess, at the get-go, because it's about a Hulk, right? So it didn't really, but I this sort of, when you had said this, every woman, every person kind of concept, that sort of what's kind of resonated with me throughout is that every episode I found something different to identify or align with Jennifer, whether it is her, like you had sort of just said, she kind of has this wide-eyed sense of wonder about a lot of things. And she is a small human being. So I think it gives her a more childlike and youthful look. So in a lot of those scenes, it's almost like she's a little kid, right? And she's all excited about these things, which I get very excited about stuff too, very easily. So it empowers me to like, oh, other people are like that.
Right.
But she can kind of turn on a dime though, and assume the role that she needs to assume. Because we've seen in several situations where she has to become Hulk or turn that Hulkness on, whether, she got jumped in the street, or Wong shows up and is like, hey, we got to fight these demons from another realm. Being in the Hulk form and being She-Hulk are two different things, I think. And she's forced to be in Hulk form a lot, but still be Jennifer at her job, right? So even though she's presenting as She-Hulk, she's still Jennifer, which I think adds to this conflict of who am I? And so I think that's really, to me, the most humanizing part of her, is that even as an adult, she went to grad school, she went and got her JD, she is a lawyer, like she's achieved her goals.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you're done or you're happy or you've come full circle. And so seeing her struggle and trying to figure out, well, who am I and what is my place and what does this now mean for me? I think a lot of us feel that, if not on a daily basis, but through transitions, moving, getting a new job, graduating college, going through a relational change, whether that's adding or subtracting a member. There are a lot of opportunities in our lives where we can take a step back and reflect on who am I and what does this mean for me? And I think she does a really great job at showing it doesn't have to be graceful, right? Like it gets messy sometimes and we make mistakes, but it's about learning who we are and finding those convictions.
That's fantastic. Shelly, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I loved this episode. Actually, when it ended, I was like, is it time already? Like,
it was pretty fast.
It felt really, not that they all weren't great, but this one was like more of what I want out of the show. I've said in past episodes, which people can write me hate mail, I don't like Doctor Strange and I don't like Wong and I don't like that whole things. I like it to be about her, and I like it to be about, what's Jennifer Walters doing? What kind of hijinks does she have? And so going to get the clothes, having her friends, being in the episode, her coworkers, like I really enjoyed it more than a lot of the other episodes. And I hope that it continues into next week. And I hope we get to see the clothes.
We better get to see the clothes, man. We need a lot of wool, so I've got to see what that means.
Especially the special item he made for her.
That's right. And
I want to see that.
I'm hoping it's her She-Hulk outfit that she wears in the comics, like her sort of superhero outfit.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Because they sort of alluded to it being maybe like a negligee or a sexy dress or something. But yeah, I hope it. I'm with you, Shelly. That's what I'm hoping it is too.
And we can't overlook the Daredevil cowl. The Daredevil.
I knew you were going to bring that up as soon as I saw it.
Can't wait for Charlie to come into the show. And I said this during our first podcast, one of the reasons I would like to see Daredevil show up in the show is because the way they wrote him on Netflix, I do think he's a respectable male, right? And I do think he would be what we'd call a feminist. And so I'd love for her to run into a male that's not one of these Tinder app stooges, right? And one that's going to be kind and so I hope that happens. I got to say, I mentioned Mary Tyler Moore earlier, and And now I'm just thinking that's what the vibe of this episode was, because she was hanging out with her work friends so much. They were hanging out together. When Pug and Nikki go to beat the clothes maker guy, and he gives them the Avengers or the Avengers shirts, and she says, "Okay, I'll buy one of your Avengers shirts." She goes, "And I had two, right?" She goes, "Oh yeah, I need the whole ensemble."
Whole ensemble, yeah.
And then they're out by the elevator doing their little dance with the Thor hammer. I just love the level of comedy that those actors were able to bring. And then all of a sudden you get this moment of just desperation, kind of humiliation in the courtroom. And I just, the balance in the writing here is pretty stellar. I have to say, it's brilliant. And they actually swore today, by the way. They actually swore in the episode when he says, "I don't do shit."
Yeah.
The guy that I don't, so,
the designer.
Bring it on. Bring it on. Absolutely.
I loved the Pug Nikki adventure. I love them as a duo. But now that you mentioned it, it just reminded me, I love the fact that he's coming to her because he wants her to buy commemorative sneakers, and she says, "Why do you need two?" And he says, "One to wear, one to I forget how he phrased it, but it was a cute rhyme.
One to stock, one to
stock, one to rock." And she's
right,
like, "So let me get this straight. You have a whole closet of shoes you don't wear." And then she's like, "I respect that," right? She's totally on board with that. And that's such a stereotypical woman thing, right? To have this closet full of shoes.
Right.
And for them to turn it around and then have the stylish female character be like, "Yes, let's do this." Like, I thought that was a great way to flip that gender role on its head and just play with it and have fun with it. Yeah. So I wouldn't mind seeing more of like the sidekicks in that regard. But I'd like not taking the focus away from Jennifer, but seeing, who they are as people and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, I think they are going to land on not a final answer, but they're gonna land with a portrayal of Jennifer She-Hulk by the final episode that I think when they go to season 2, which I hope they do, we might learn a little more of the backstory of Nikki, right? And we might learn a little more of the backstory of Amelia, because when Jennifer integrates, whatever that means, I mean, she's already amazing. And at the same time, she becomes something that Amelia never saw before. She becomes something that Nikki never saw before, in terms of how to be someone who can be two people and still be whole. And I'd love to see them play. In other words, instead of Jennifer reacting to them, I'd love to see them reacting to her, and what they think of what she's become, and what that means.
Yeah. Great. I love this show because a lot of the superhero shows or movies, we saw them become the superhero, but this one feels different. I'm not sure exactly why. It just seems different to me. Maybe because it's more real life, it's real world. She's trying to have a job. I'm not sure, but I love it.
Even when the guy says, "What kind of superhero apparatus do you need in your clothes?" And she says, "I'm just a lawyer, man." So they're really playing that very well. And
she's not,
go ahead.
So she's not a superhero yet, right? Like, she has the capacity, but she's not quite there yet.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then this character has the possibility of actually not challenging what we mean by superhero, but providing us a different take on what a superhero might be. I mean, I think they did a really good job of that with Jessica Jones. And now we have someone who's not Jessica Jones, someone who doesn't have a traumatized past. I mean, she got in a car accident, but it's not like Jessica Jones where her family died. So, her energy is not coming from trauma. She's a professional woman, and she can show us something different, a different take on being a superhero. I mean, that's all about the writing, and I really hope they pull it off. There's one other question I want to ask you guys. If you remember in the first episode, she spent a lot of time talking to her cousin, and he was frustrated by the fact that she could do Hulk. She could manage her anger, and there was a whole thing in the initial part of the episode about she didn't need the anger management training like he did because she had learned how to do it. And I don't I just hope they bring him back in, or bring that conversation back into the show. How has that changed for her? Has it not changed for her? Has he learned something because he interacted with her that way? I don't know. They're leaning into vulnerabilities of hers right now. Yet in that first episode, they were leaning into the strengths that she had of anger management that her cousin didn't. Any thoughts on that?
As I said before, I think in our first podcast, women they're angry on the inside. So it's easier, I think, for her as a woman to control her anger. There's a reason why the Incredible Hulk and the Punisher are my favorite characters.
Love me some Frankie.
That's who I am on the inside. Like on the outside, I'm sunshine and rainbows, but on the inside, and so I think that gets at some of that is she, has to be nice. She has to control her anger. And it would be great to have Bruce come back and see, she can manage it. And maybe it was because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you, Shelly, on who's my favorite and why. Love me some Punisher. Again, conviction, right? He knows who he is. But anyway, sorry, I just got totally distracted by Frank Castle.
I'm not editing that out either, by the way.
Sorry, what was the question again? The actual question?
Well, what I was commenting on
her anger.
The first episode, they leaned into her strength.
Right.
And for the past few episodes, I've been examining vulnerabilities. At least that's my take.
Right. So I don't know if this was intentional or not, but because I have a background in mental health counseling, it really made me reflect on how depression manifests in men and women, because the DSM symptoms are women. That is how women present. Men tend to abuse substances, and they tend to be more volatile and angry because that's how their emotions manifest. And so I'm wondering, I think we can all agree that Bruce was probably suffering from some depression before he became the Hulk, right? He had a very low existence. Super smart. I don't think that we can divulge that later in a different podcast. We haven't really seen that much about Jennifer, but from what we do know, and sort of this internal struggle of who I am and trying to find her place at the law firm and, getting a job at this law firm that she always wanted, I wouldn't be surprised if there maybe is some element of depression for her as well. But women tend to be more in tune with it and more aware of it. And it's not anger that it manifests. So part of me is wondering if Bruce's anger is really his depression finally being given an opportunity to express itself in a way that's acceptable to society. And that's why we're not seeing it with Jennifer, because like you said, Shelly, we're more in tune with, and we know how to sort of navigate and negotiate and present in ways that make us more, I hate this word, but acceptable to what the social roles would be. But going back to Daredevil, that kind of fits into this too. Part of me is wondering if maybe Matt is going to have a moment with Jennifer, kind of like, I'm sure you both watched Sandman, but kind of like when we see when Morpheus meets with his sister Death. And the whole episode around them is Death is just doing her thing, but it gives Morpheus this perspective for what his responsibility is and how it's not really as much of a burden as he had seen it. And so seeing she's not necessarily instructing him, but just seeing what her role is and what she has to shoulder gives him this new perspective for his role and what he has to shoulder. And I wonder if seeing Matt Murdock, someone who is physically disabled, but has not let that at all limit him, but he still plays the part, right? When he's Matt Murdock, he is a blind lawyer, but when he is Daredevil, he can see better than any of us. So I'm wondering if she's going to be able to see him and his sort of dual identity and how he's been able to merge that and become Matt Murdock / Daredevil, and if that's going to be part of her journey into merging her two identities into one as well.
I think that'd be awesome. Charlie Cox is the actor to do it. I mean, he nailed Daredevil. Probably one of my favorite acting roles in the MCU. Absolutely. Anything else you guys want to say about this episode?
Just loved it, as I've already said. Like I said, I hope it's similar next week.
Absolutely.
I wish we got to see the sneakers they waited in line for. Hopefully those come next week too.
I just want to know when I'm going to get my Avengers t-shirt that I ordered, at the post credits. So we did get some viewer mail this time from our podcast regarding the last episode. A gentleman by the name of Will Smalls. He writes, "Wow, I have not really been entertained by Marvel shows because they're usually cookie cutter. I appreciate what Dr. Zombie Scotty explored, especially in the pop culture with extreme like incel and recent convo on lonely men and how rejection can be part of the sexual violence conversation." Before we go any further on that, that's the issue I was talking about where we kind of went left. Because I was devastated by the scene in the last episode when they had a good time the night before as She-Hulk, and then she makes breakfast and he walks out and says, "I'm going to leave." I mean, that's rejection. And when we play the seduction game, there's always risk rejection dynamics going on, and we often don't talk about them. And so I was pleased to see that play out, and it started a conversation. He says, "As a queer person, I wish a lot of parents could even have a sexual conversation with young people, but there's so much dogma and shame-based ideologies or religious rules that let adults hide from proper preparation or emotional fallout." Do you guys have any comments, responses to Will?
I think we're tackling two large issues here. I agree with you, Scott, that was a really devastating scene. And again, goes back to that sort of every person moment where and I think
exactly.
They had said, I think Jennifer or someone had said in the show when that happened, like, wow, what a devastating blow to Jen, right? Like, because it was.
Yes.
And so I think that point is well taken, but also sort of our queer community or LGBT plus folks. We have a very heteronormative narrative in our society, and talking about heterosex is still kind of taboo and off limits. And part of the reason I'm teaching this Beyond the Binary course that I'm teaching to freshmen is because there is no LGBT 101 out there in the world for parents or students. And so, we have youth and children and who identify and feel lost. And then we have parents who don't know how to navigate this with their children. And so it's a very important area that we need to have advocacy and education on, because there's just a dearth in our society. But I think it's the larger issue of sex, which is still taboo on top of the LGBT. So when that intersection of that conversation just makes it so difficult. And I do hope that they explore Nikki more then, because it seems like she is an LGBT character. So I do hope that they explore more. And we are seeing LGBT representation more in TV and whatnot, but it's not always accurate, right? And it's not always how experiences really go. It's sometimes they're romanticized or idealized. So I would love it if Marvel took this opportunity to use this platform to help educate and help share with their viewers, both parents and children, how to have these conversations with your loved ones and how to approach these topics in a non-judgmental and supportive way.
Yeah, thanks, Will, for writing in about that. I also like it because it's not cookie cutter. It's always this, I don't even know how to put it, like fine line, right? Buzz Lightyear had a same-sex kiss this summer and people lost their minds and wanted to and it's very, we watched it, my daughter and I was like excited. I thought there was going to be this whole love story, and it was, but it wasn't the main love story, right? And they're often this side love stories, or it's briefly alluded to. And I'm glad that it's making its way into mainstream culture. And this is a Marvel show, which lots of people watch, and Buzz Lightyear was Disney. But what I would like to happen is I would like somebody to really go for it, like hard. And I mean, so it was the main story, the main character. And once again, I'm going to say this over and over until it happens. Unbeatable Squirrel Girl would be perfect as a Marvel show. And there are lots of LGBTQ plus folks and characters. So Marvel, whoever, if anyone ever is listening, Unbeatable Squirrel Girl would do a great job with that.
Yeah, I love what both of you said. I think the comment about the LGBTQ issue being that we don't even talk about heterosex with our kids, right?
No.
And the problem that I see is that then they end up learning about it from their peers. And what I mean by learning about it is you can read books about the act, but no one knows about the phenomenology of the moment, what it feels like to be in a moment of seduction. And I don't think it's trivial that I would say we should teach that, simply because you're not the same person in those moments. And all the cognitive assets you might think you can bring to bear, they're just not as available in those moments.
Mhm.
And I think if we could start to approach sexual education more in terms of phenomenology and self-management, as opposed to anatomy or morality, I do think LGBTQ plus issues would naturally follow. Because if you're focusing on what it feels like, if you're focusing on managing, then it's not about morality. And I think when we get those issues out of the way, I think I'm going to say I think we'll make progress. And I usually don't use the word progress, but in this case, I think it's appropriate. And I do want to say one more thing, because the word, one of the things that Will said is lonely men and how rejection can be part of the sexual violence conversation. It's hard to say something like that and just let it go, because I don't want anyone to think that we're saying sexual violence is okay. That's not at all what we're saying. Again, for me, because we don't examine the phenomenology of the moment, we don't study what it feels like to be in those moments of risk-taking and rejection. We lose the opportunity to train people how to deal with that moment. So if I have no idea if that has anything to do with the sexual violence issue, all I know is I have had experiences in my life where I've trained men to manage that moment. You know, rule number one, if you don't want to have regrets, don't go into the room. Right? If you're in a relationship with someone else or something, don't go in the room, because once you get into that phenomenal space of seduction, it's hard to back off, or it becomes increasingly difficult to back off. So manage it ahead of time as best you can. So please feel free to say something about that, because I just want to make sure it's not me, the only person talking about sexual violence.
So I'm gonna plug my book here for a moment.
There you go.
Come out called Understanding Sex Offenses, Holt and Clevenger, 2022. Just came out September 1st.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But I'm saying this because there's not necessarily one reason for sexual violence, but when we look at the incels and we look at the lonely white man, usually when we look at those sort of things, it often comes down to, a lot of the time, like entitlement and what people sometimes think that they're owed, or like anger, or like power. And those things are hard to disentangle from other societal things.
Yes.
You know, I'm always going to blame the patriarchy for everything. Right. And so I'm going to blame it again. But I think that was a very intelligent comment, because those things are tied to sexual violence in a way that I think it's hard for us to kind of pick apart.
I love what you're saying. It is. It's all there. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's all there. Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, like you just said, Shelly, the patriarchy is systematic. So these are lessons that are taught when they're young and reinforced about what you're owed. And again, back to gender roles and expectations of society and what men and women do. And so, you know, if you're brought up and that is ingrained in you, especially if you grow up in a household with violence and you see violence used to meet those ends, then unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know until you know you don't know, right? And if all you're exposed to is this, then you don't know that isn't healthy until hopefully someone sets you straight. So, I mean, I don't think you're wrong saying it's the patriarchy's fault. So we can acknowledge all these situations where violence has been enacted for this reason, and yet we don't do anything to address the reason that the violence is enacted. So if we started being more proactive instead of reactive, then maybe we could use the word progress more liberally, Scott.
Well said. Well said. And focus on self-management, not on morality. I think that's where we go astray. So this has been an amazing conversation. Kellie, thanks so much for joining us today. Please let us know where people can find you on social media.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you all again for having me. So on Facebook, it is my name, Kellie Wallace, Kellie Wallace. And on Instagram, I am a little laughing star, LIL, laughing star.
Fantastic. How about you, Shelly?
At Dr. Clevenger on Twitter.
Fantastic. And you can find all episodes of She-Hulking on Dark Loops Productions on YouTube. If you'd like to write in, tell us what we got right, tell us what we got wrong, send an email to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com. However, you can also just leave a comment on this YouTube page as Will did, and we'll be sure to read it and discuss it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is from all of us to all of you. Big hugs. And remember, smash the
Smash the
patriarchy.
patriarchy.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.